Hey everyone, it's Bob. Welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ, your go-to source for insightful conversations on human-centric AI readiness, talent transformation, responsible innovation, and the future of work. In this episode, I sit down with David Arnoux, who is currently the co-founder of the AI-native venture studio Humanoidz. He's the community leader of the Gen AI Circle and go-to-market strategist at HeyArnoux. David formerly co-founded a startup called Growth Tribe that you might be familiar with, and in general has been a technology innovator for a long time. David and I explore what it really means to move beyond augmentation and into the agentic era of work. We discuss the four-stage landscape of how AI is reshaping work, from co-intelligence and augmentation through full workflow automation and into the uncomfortable reality that some categories of jobs simply won't survive the next few years. We also get into responsible AI guardrails for real-world agent deployment, the emerging shift from SaaS to custom-built tools, and how the heaviest AI adopters are running entire businesses with agents doing most of the work in the background. If you want an honest practitioner-level look at where AI and work are actually heading, you won't want to miss this entire episode. Thank you so much for listening. Let's go talk to David. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I am your host, Bob Pulver. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Mr. David Arnoux. How are you today, David?
I'm super. I'm excited about our chat.
Likewise. Thanks for doing this. I saw some of the stuff that you were building when I attended one of Hong Lee's Recruiting Brain Food weekly calls. You were building some stuff in the go-to-market space. I think we were playing around with some LinkedIn tools that you've built. And so I was just fascinated by the tour of some of the projects that you were working on. So I was anxious to get you into a deeper conversation about some of the things you're building and the philosophy and some of your career arc and some of the multiple things that you're doing right now. So I thought we could just start with just you giving a bit of background about what got you to this point and some of the projects that you're working on.
One of the first interesting businesses I started, I think, that relates to this story was a Growth Tribe. That was about 10 years ago. We built it in 2015 or 16 because basically nobody in Europe specifically, we were very targeted at Europe, was teaching marketeers how to actually do data and growth properly. That was a thing 10 years ago. And we ended up training about 35,000 people across 15, 16 countries before I rolled off. But what's kind of crazy is that I'd say the bet we made back then was right, but we massively underestimated the timeline. So we thought marketeers needed to become more technical, growth mindset, experiment-based, learn SQL to a certain extent, maybe dabble in Python, learn experimentation. They did. But within 10 years, AI just ate that whole stack, essentially. And we were teaching AI before it was cool, but back then it was a lot of predictive analytics and a lot of linear regressions, to be honest. And it was beginning of decision trees and neural nets, but 95 use cases were just linear regression, predictive analytics. But so the path from there to here is honestly just me chasing the same thesis, basically. Smart humans plus better tooling equals crazy results. And that's what we see happening 10x, 100x at the moment. The tooling keeps getting more powerful. There were riots over the mechanical loom back in the 1800s. And today the tooling is agents, not dashboards. And now I run three things side by side. Something called Humanoidz with my co-founder Walid. That's our AI native venture studio, out of which we push a bunch of SaaS. And we also have partnerships with corporate clients who we build for and share on the revenue and on the equity. We build SaaS products with agents from day one, so AI native. And then there is Gen AI Circle, which is the community that I run and co-run actually with the members. We're like 470 now. I think it's 470 of the heaviest Gen AI adopters across the globe at the moment. And it's our signal in this sort of way, in this cascade of noise, I would say. And even the signal is noisy nowadays because it goes so fast. And then there's just what I call HeyArnoux, which is my fractional practice. And that's where I work with maybe 4 or 5 at the same time, B2B or B2C clients at a time on GTM, go to market, which is fancy way of saying sales and marketing, and AI strategy. And the honest version, I would say, of why I run all three, it's like a flywheel. So they feed into each other. The studio breaks things and I learn from it. The community shows me what the actual frontier is, catch up, what's hype, what's not hype, what people are doing, and the fractional clients, it's where I get to play around with somebody else's CRM and strategy and work with stakeholders and like real world deployment data. Without all three, I think I'd be bored or flying blind.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And yeah, I'm sure it's a lot to juggle all three. I'm sure you've found ways to sort of cross-pollinate, ideas and concepts, across them. So would you, just in terms of how they may interact, I mean, if someone comes up with an idea, within the Gen AI circle, community, you could technically just feed that into, Humanoidz or find another way to help them, bring that idea to fruition, to commercialization or whatever the goal is.
Yeah, so no, in the sense that I'd say the biggest blocker at the moment for growing a business is actually audience or access to some type of proprietary data and or having some regulatory capture in some weird industry that no one's ever heard of. So ideas are a dimes a dozen now. I don't think it's the revenge of the idea gal or guy. I think it's the revenge of the person. Well, it's not even revenge. Distribution's everything nowadays, and audience is more and more important than ever. So what we usually do is we try to partner with people or individuals or organizations that either have a massive CRM or some sort of data that nobody else has access to, or know about some weird, boring process that no one's ever heard of, but that is a massive market, like boring businesses. Yeah, that's where we kind of focus at the moment. And the idea of the three, sort of this trifecta of these three, is that like the fractional consulting, it's like B2B clients, GTM strategy, AI integration. That's where you see the deep client problems show up. So from time to time, you see a deep client problem that could potentially be a venture, but usually these clients, they just want me to fix that issue and they're not into venture building. So it's usually like people paying me, 5 figures a month to help them not get killed by AI. If I put it in really weird terms, and help do stakeholder management with security, with CIO, with compliance, all of that stuff. The Gen AI circle is the community arm. I really believe audience and community are remote nowadays because we don't know what's true or what's false online anymore. Dead internet theory, la-di-da-di-da. At least there's a similitude of real humans, even though sometimes you interact with what their agents are telling them to say, but we keep it real. We keep it really humans. We have sort of a manifesto around that. And what's great there is we do one brain trust session a month. Members share work, playbooks. We publish over 100 of them so far. We're going to try to reach 200. And funnily enough, nowadays, playbooks, it's not so much reading the playbook and implementing it. A lot of the time is you download the scale or the MD file, or we always have a copy for LLM button, and then you feed it to your LLM and ask your LLM or your whatever your setup is this worth me implementing? How can I adapt it? So yeah. So it's kind of compounding loop. Client surfaces a hard problem. I bring the question to the community. 5 members have already solved it. We extract the playbook, and potentially the studio builds a product around it if it's big enough. And I use that product back in client work, and round it goes until we're all out of a job. Joking. But
we're gonna get into that
yeah.
for sure. But yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, I'm sort of a guy with no shortage of ideas, but I definitely appreciate the fact that, going into businesses and understanding where there's some, nascent sort of need and challenge that needs to be solved is the ideal, starting point, right? And so I certainly recognize that there's a lot of opportunity for folks like you to lead those types of engagements and to show what's possible. And then, the community piece, I think it's fantastic because I'm a sort of a collective intelligence advocate. I have been for at least 2 decades, and collective human intelligence, I should say. So getting those people and that cognitive diversity together in a group is great. And then you can always complement that or augment that, the collective intelligence of the group, with some custom, AI, which, I'm guessing you've probably explored as well. But yeah, really, really fascinating. I did find it, some of the things that you've created, I was mentioning before that you've got a site, kind of a fun site called don'tbuildthis.com. And I was going to take a couple of my Post-it note ideas and just throw them in there just for fun.
It hurts.
For those listening, you should definitely check it out. It's basically put in your idea and they'll basically like roast your idea and poke holes in it. And so I think it'd be a good exercise for people to think, you have all these great ideas, and maybe David has something to say about that. Just on these like sort of human, themes that happen, and as we think about the human and AI relationship, I thought we could unpack that a little bit in terms of how people think about. I think Professor Malik would call it co-intelligence. Humans plus AI, as I was alluding to before. Collective human intelligence plus artificial intelligence. But then you have this concept of augmentation that says, humans are great at a lot of things, and we don't want to lose the humanity and the human centricity, but AI can perhaps make them better, have them think more deeply about their ideas, their decisions, all of these other ways that AI can help. And then you have automation, where we're like taking things off of the plate of a human to hopefully free them up to do other things. But I just thought we could, talk about how you think about those things as you talk to clients, as you engage with the community in the Gen AI circle, and how you think about some of the other projects that you work on.
Yeah, I have pretty strong opinions on this, and I don't want to create anxiety, but I do want to create a little bit of fear and a little bit of hope at the same time. And I also, deep down, I think we're all going to be fine, like with any S-curve, like with any new tech. But I do have a really, really strong opinion about this because I'm on the bleeding edge, and I also interact with older industries. So I also see the laggards a little bit. And I also truly believe that there's beautiful industries out there, like building bridges or actual physical bridges, or really, really deep tech that are so necessary, or care work, nurses, teachers. So it's kind of a meta discussion, I would say. So I'll just come at it with kind of a strong opinion, and then people can nuance it for themselves, and we can put a little bit of water in the wine. So I think most people today are stuck in co-intelligence land or augmentation land, and it's comfortable. And they think AI is like a faster typing assistant still. I would say that was the 2023 frame, and I think it's already obsolete, like completely obsolete. So the way I see the four words, co-intelligence is what Malik popularized. AI is a thinking partner. The book is amazingly well written. I follow Malik on LinkedIn religiously. Anything he posts, AI is a thinking partner. Real, useful, but it's still you in the driver's seat. All right. Augmentation, it's what I see most enterprises sold themselves on. ChatGPT Enterprise for like 500 seats. You got workshops on prompt engineering. That was all the rage in 24, 25, still happening today. 6 months later, adoption's like 12%, and the CFO is like, where did the investment go? Then you've got this wave of automation. So that's kind of where the real money lives right now. Whole workflows running without a human in the middle, a little bit of human in the loop, lead scoring, email triage, content production. You got weekly reporting, customer onboarding, things like that. And token costs blowing up. And then CFO asking, why are we spending so much on tokens? Can't you optimize token use? And by the way, the era of the subsidized frontier models is about to end. We're starting to see they're throttling their models, and we might start paying a lot more for these tokens. Having said that, most of the work that we do can be done on cheaper models or open source models, and you only need the frontier models for a few use cases. Now, the one we don't talk about is redundancy. So that's the part nobody wants to say out loud, the whole categories of work that just stop existing. And my read is that a lot of mid-tier knowledge work, which actually, those are the formatting jobs. They're like the data moving jobs, the report writing jobs. They tend to be the entry-level jobs. Those don't survive the next 18 months. And there's been a lot of freezing hires on those jobs. Now, some people are saying that the frontier models are becoming more expensive than entry-level humans, and entry-level humans equipped with smart LLMs are actually cheaper and more efficient than relying solely on the frontier models. But I would say that a lot of the work we're asking the models to do don't require the frontier models. And I think we need to be honest about the fact that pretending it's all just about augmentation is how you and I end up unprepared. So the work that survives, I believe, is taste, judgment, relationships, and creating new things that don't exist. So good taste, cultural curiosity, domain expertise, knowing what's good, what's not good, what has value, what doesn't have value, judgment, building up real relationships. On most of the projects where I work, you free up time for people who are in GTM functions, sales and marketing, to build relationships with with clients, with customers. The analogy is usually the account executives who takes a skateboard to go see the client rather than filling out Salesforce. Or for recruiters, it's building up those relationships rather than spending half your day filling out an ATS or whatever it is. Humans were not meant to fill out an ATS, right? Boring. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody got into this job to do it. However, I think there's a real list of jobs and functions that won't exist anymore, and we need to be realistic about it. And just like any S-curve, any technological revolution, we need to jump on board with this one. And the other thing that's kind of that we see happening is there's actually going to be two internets. There's going to be one internet that's human to human, where you and I are still making the purchase decision on a piece of software we want to buy or on a candidate that we want to hire. And more, we're seeing the A-to-A internet, the agent-to-agent. Stripe released something where you can actually give Stripe access for it to be able to make purchasing decisions for you. So we're going to see an A-to-A internet, which is agents buying from agents and decision-making from agent to agent directly. And we already do it when we buy software, except it's going to happen more and more. So just pretending it's all about augmentation is how we end up unprepared. You've got time still, but it's important to start writing the wave and be interested in the subject and understand. It could be as simple as, what's one task or process or workflow that I can augment myself or automate this week or next week. It could be as simple as that. But I do think we need to be realistic about how powerful this, Promethean style technology is. It's the fire for the brain, basically.
Yeah. Wow. No, I think that's a really nice sort of landscape view of all the ways in which we have got to think about this sort of human AI relationship. And I guess I feel like some of it where we're stuck now, I don't know if stuck is the right term, but as we think about how to do it right, I spent a lot of time talking about human centricity, focused on not just responsible use, but responsible design. And so I feel like because everyone's kind of scrambling, we don't have a lot of, legislation, at least here in the US, any different rules, more stringent rules in Europe and in other places around the world. I feel like people are still sort of running around disoriented and not sure what their individual or collective, place is in, that department within an organization or the organization as a whole. And I feel like there's a lot of subjectivity in terms of how you think about human centricity. What do we want to allow humans to continue to do? Should they have the freedom and the agency to do the things that they want to do? There was just a new report from this, I think it was the Center for Humane Technology, and it laid out all these principles about, what we shouldn't allow AI to do. And I was a little bit, I'm definitely a human centricity advocate, but some of it gets a little, I would say, too fluffy in the sense, listen, there's just because maybe somebody likes doing, filing and shuffling data around and copying and pasting because it's less taxing on the brain. And it's maybe how they, it's a relaxing, sort of, not a highly cognitive, task, and they enjoy doing it. Do we take it away from them? People are at different thresholds about what they want to continue doing and where they get job satisfaction from. But I don't know, to me, that's a little naive to think that, the organization is just going to let you continue doing it at, whatever the additional cost is to the organization. You got to recognize that we need to advance a lot of the things that we do to make sort of progress. And so if you want to do those things, then maybe go find a job at a company that's more of a laggard than someone who's trying to, fuel, sort of rocket ship kind of growth within an organization. I just think people are kind of disoriented about where to trust AI to take things over.
Optimize your business with a Workforce AI Edge powered by Visier. Make smarter decisions and achieve better outcomes with real-time AI insights delivered to every people leader. Explore more at visier.com.
And so, I guess I'm just curious to get your reaction to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like asking a truck driver to use a paper map nowadays rather than Google Map, right? Just because they enjoy it. So whereas where to trust it, that's kind of okay. So we're talking about accountability and responsible AI. And of course, that's a cursor. It's a cultural cursor. It's an individual cursor. So it's difficult to sort of give a blanket statement about this. I can give you my actual rules, just sort of how I approach it. So anything that touches the outside world goes through a confirmation step, at least when we're building it out. So sending DMs, posting publicly, paying anything, signing anything. The agent drafts, a human reviews, and then the agent executes after approval. So we've learned this the hard way a few times after the script that DM'd people that I had already manually messaged, for example, except when you do a little bit of hardening, you can then just set up the right guardrails and a sample check or a check from time to time. So typically when you start off, it's that anything that touches the outside world goes through confirmation step. And then once you start trusting it, and then there's continuous quality reviews. 2 is audit logs. So for every meaningful action, time, action, source target, if an agent does something stupid, you have to be able to trace it. So we use markdown files in a memory folder, every action logged, boring, but kind of critical. And then 3 is, of course, pre-flight checks before an agent does outreach, cross-reference against the data store. Before it makes a claim, it cites the source, la-di-da-di-da. And then the 4th one is like a daily log file. So high frequency tasks like outreach, they get a daily cap and a log file. So the agent literally cannot run again until tomorrow. And then 5 is the agent never executes destructive actions without explicit human input. So it doesn't kill everything. Even with all those guardrails, you're never totally safe, as you're always safer, but you're never totally safe. And then deletions, force pushes, money movement, sending mass, anything, there should always be like human in the loop to be able to confirm. However, once you start scaling, you realize that you can't always be the human in the loop. We have one venture that's in the 6 figures now, and we're running it with one person, basically. So the human in the loop would just be validating stuff all the time. So at some point, you need to kind of trust your systems, and you can never be fully safe. You can be safer. And our cursor, our North Star is a little bit, is this delivering value to the end user, essentially? If it is, then we keep pushing it. If it isn't, and again, it's a cursor, right? It's not black or white. It's nuanced. It's not a dichotomy. So I think the bigger frame for me is that responsible AI is not a philosophy debate. It can actually be a checklist. And it's the same checklist you'd be building for managing a team of like 22-year-olds. Fast, capable, occasionally reckless, needs structure. I don't know if I should use age. Maybe we should use personality types, because there's a lot of reckless 55, 42-year-olds out there as well. But treat your agents the same way. I do think that, are you okay for me to go on this? Because I have like a mental model I'd love to share on what heavy adopters are doing within our group or within my network. And you can see how far people are taking this at the moment. But maybe you want to just rebound a bit.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great to go through that. And then while you do that, you may be answering what my next question was going to be. But so yeah, please.
What's the next one? So I can maybe like dive into it at the same time.
Well, I was going to ask you a question about just some of the personal things that I'm doing and how it relates to the philosophy that you just outlined that I think you were going to elaborate on. But I did want to ask about how your philosophy has been sort of embedded into your Humanoidz the businesses that you support.
Yep.
Through that.
So I think one thing I always like to look at what people are doing. I think it's that Mark Andreessen quotes. Look at what developers are doing on the weekend and invest in that. I like to look at what people are doing in the Gen AI circle, the heavy adopters are doing in the Gen AI circle, and then use that as my sort of North Star, cursor, compass for what's coming next and how I should think about the world. So inside our Gen AI circle, we have like 400, 470 of like the heaviest adopters that I know, founders, operators, agency owners, technical marketeers. Not everybody's super mature, right? On the technical side. A lot of them are immature, but they're playing around with it, tinkers. And there's a whole group of what we call AI adoption and implementation, that their job is to translate what the technology can do and bring it into their organization. And some of the patterns I see, and this is how we should think about this responsible AI piece, is that they run AI headlessly. So we're not talking chat windows, and that's how I run my businesses. I don't have chat windows. I don't even have an interface anymore. I run my businesses from the terminal, and I'm not a developer. From the terminal, from the command line interface. So if you see my screen today, it's a wide screen, and I've got a bunch of terminals. So it's like a bunch of command line interfaces. And that's where I chat with my skills, with my agents, with my data sources, even with my email, with my Google Calendar. We had conversations via my email. I never opened the email interface. It was always through that command line interface. There's data coming in from the different products that I run. I don't look at the dashboards from the different tools that we have, whether it's PostHog or Mixpanel or Google Analytics. I pull the data and I interact with the command line interface, and I create my own dashboards. I have cron jobs, scheduled background agents. So these frontiers people, their work happens, most of it is over, for the ones who are further than what I'm doing, their work happens overnight. One member built, and she was like a executive at a pretty big, boring enterprise, heavily compliant firm. She built a morning briefing pipeline. So by the time she opens her laptop, the agent has already pulled emails, summarized priorities, drafted replies, and chewed her day. Took her about 9 months to get this validated in a sandboxed environment in an Azure environment, because she's on the Microsoft stack. The two is they build their own skills. A skill is a markdown file, which is just a text file with instructions, no code. So heavy adopters, they productize every workflow that they do twice. Most users just chat. Heavy adopters, they skill it. You build a skill. So if you see yourself doing something 3, 4, 5 times, you turn that into a skill that your system can use, which is a fancy way of saying a repeatable set of instructions. And then 3, I would say, is that they have this sort of second brain architecture. I've actually started commercializing my second brain, 22 years of how I approach work and go to market. And you build it as what's called, you have a memory folder plus integrations into the different tools that you use. So the AI knows your business. It has, in my case, it has access to my Slack, my Notion, meeting transcripts, not from client work, because I'm not allowed to do that, but from like our internal ventures, to the CRM. When I start a task, the AI briefs itself. It already has all the context. I don't need to brief it on anything, which is a cybersecurity nightmare, by the way. So there's different ways to approach that. We could talk about the lethal trifecta, isolation, how you approach that. But that's kind of the frontier. There's 3 other things that these people do. They orchestrate sub-agents. So not one AI, but a swarm with an orchestrator that delegates and parallelizes. So one member runs what he calls Wiggum loops overnight. He spawns 20 parallel agents on a problem, checks results in the morning, sees if it's good enough to push out. That check result is where the human in the loop and the domain expert is, and the taste is, and the evaluation. But that's it. The rest is sort of spawned by agents. Yeah, I think that's it. And 2 other things that are important is these frontiers people, they've ditched SaaS, replaced 80% of their stack with custom-built micro tools. So of course they need a bit of maintenance. They need to learn how to maintain it, et cetera, et cetera. And they eat their own dog food. They use things they're building on themselves first, way before clients. And then last thing is that now we're voice first. So walking, talking, dictating into agents. Now that you've got tools like Whisperflow, and some people, they actually do everything from their Logitech mouse, where basically one of the buttons is to talk to your Whisperflow. So you're dictating to your computer. And the other button is, yeah, sure. To your CLI, it's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah, sure, go ahead. And then, so I mean, we have real numbers. Like there's one guy in the community. He's a doctor running a clinic, 3,000 Facebook followers in January, 40,000 in April, 2 million plus view post. Clinic booked solid through January. He doesn't have a content team. He has agents. And for me, that blows my mind on what's possible nowadays. So that's where we're going. And I know we say we're in a bubble in this group, et cetera, but we also were saying 2 years ago that agents hallucinated and we would never be agentified and we could never have, a reliable picture of Will Smith built by the image agents. And we just get used now to the fact that we've got photorealistic images at the touch of our fingers. So this is definitely where we're going. And your moral compass, your responsible AI compass needs to be built based off of those facts. It's happening, it's being pushed. Now there's sort of ethical issues, there's social issues that need to be addressed. There's also environmental issues. The only thing I can say about those is that with every new technological S-curve, for some reason, we forgot about those issues because as humans, we have OTF, it's called optimal foraging theory. We will choose the path of least resistance if it makes our lives easier, and we will choose convenience over almost everything else, whether it's security, the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's our responsibility for people who are on the cutting edge of this to push the conversation in that direction, while also, riding the wave at the same time, because from a capitalistic point of view, for better, for worse, it makes sense, whether it's on the job market or on whatever market you're on at the moment. Sorry, there was a lot of things at the same time, but I hope it makes a bit of sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And I think it was important for people to get the context and sort of the landscape of all the things that need to be considered, because I think to your last point, just in terms of people finding the path of least resistance, I spend a lot of time with earlier adopters and not just the current workforce, but the future workforce, right? I talk to, students, not just college students, but, K through 12, primary school, as you might call it. But, are we teaching the right habits? And are we teaching people, to learn these skills, but also make sure they're learning the material? They're not outsourcing their critical thinking. They're not just finding shortcuts, right? Whether it's, having AI do their homework or write their essay or whatever it is. And so I think it is human nature. And that's why it's important to start this, I guess it's in some ways a new form of digital literacy that you've been doing for quite a while now. I think a couple of the other things I wanted to mention is like when I personally get stuck sometimes thinking about where and when I'm going to use AI in everything that I do, whether that's with my advisory practice and the outreach that I do, the research that I do. If I don't have their contact information, I don't think I should be, scraping it from places where I'm not authorized to scrape it from. If it's making those connections like you were talking about with your second brain system, well, I've been working with Claude to try to, put that together, but I want to pull in information from a bunch of communities that I'm a member of, but I'm not the owner or the administrator of those communities. So I can't just go in and scrape data from, a Circle, not your Gen AI Circle community, but like the Circle community platform. School with a K is another community platform. Mighty Networks is another community platform. I mean, I'm a member of far too many communities. It sounds like I should be a member of yours instead and get rid of all the others. But I have all these sort of, I've fragmented my own sort of AI, upskilling and engagement kind of universe, right? And too much so. And now I'm trying to bring it all back together so that I understand the nature of my relationships and to keep tabs on all these things. And so, it's basically, social media, expanded to all these other new places. And I think community is really important to your original point around, you're not in this alone. There's other people who are building things. Maybe you can find new collaborators, new partners, new clients, whatever it is. But yeah, how do you bring it all together? So I'm having issues. I get into these internal, deliberations with myself around what is appropriate for me to do in terms of outreach, whether that's finding, podcast guests like you, or it's, potential advisory clients or, potential marketing partners, whatever it is. And then even on the post-production side, how much of the, video editing or social posts do I want to basically take off my plate, and how do I get to the point where it's producing things that are trustworthy, but are also like, I want to be transparent with what I do. If AI is helping me do certain things in that context, I want to be transparent about that. and also make sure that if I'm writing on my Substack, for example, that people are expecting that writing, those ideas, those thoughts come from my brain, not, written by AI. Show notes for a podcast is one thing, but if something is clearly trying to be, me talking about, what I'm doing and what I'm thinking and how I operate, that needs to be authentically me. So I wound up in these, battles with myself, trying to figure out where is the line for me personally of where I use AI.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think all those questions are more like moral, ethical questions. They're not really they don't really have anything to do with generative AI, because you could do all those things theoretically before the Gen AI wave and before the release of ChatGPT in November 2022. You could already scrape. You could already. That was more like automation. Now it's just a little bit faster. It's a little bit smarter, and you could do multiple of these at the same time. But those questions would have arisen 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And then with regards to writing, I would say, like, again, if I talk about the loom again, the mechanical loom, there were riots about the loom in 1830 in Dijon, for example. End of the day, I hate saying end of the day. The point of the loom, the designer still had the same sort of idea for what they wanted to produce, whether it was a rug or whether it was a sheet. So the idea for the design was there. It's just you could produce a lot more of them and a lot faster. So this technology actually gives us wings and removes the need to have always developers or automation experts in the way. I'm talking about bits, not atoms. So I think that's more like legal, ethical, moral question, GDPR considerations, ethical considerations. And that just really depends on you or on the company or on the country, on the country that you're in. And typically you'll have some people who are more aggressive. Fuck it, let's go. The ends justifies the means, and then other people who are more like on the fence as to whether this is okay, yes or no. But it's good to bring up these considerations. I think you were talking about learning a little bit also, and I think these are the things we need to teach, because I think that when we were chatting before the call, you were asking about like a decade of teaching digital skills got wrong. What did it get wrong? What do people actually need to learn? So not just on the moral side, but also on the tech side. And when you were talking about, I'm a little bit lost, where do I need to start? I think it's kind of interesting because we used to teach things like Python, Tableau, SQL, basic statistics. And then the actual core of what we were teaching was actually a mindset, like a growth mindset, rapid experimentation, hypothesis, test, ship, measure, iterate. You can use that internally, externally for every business. The technical skills are always the vehicles for the mindset, whether it's the growth mindset or the ethical mindset or the legal mindset. And that mindset tends to compound across every single tooling shift. So the people who came through, I used to have a company called Growth Tribe and really internalize, test fast, kill what doesn't work, double down on what does. Those people are absolutely thriving right now. It's what we call, it's Carol Dweck's mindset, because that's exactly the loop you need on AI. What's different right now isn't what people need to learn, it's how learning happens. So it used to be like read a book, take a 12-week course, practice for 6 months, linear, slow, kind of expensive. Now learning is a markdown file. That's crazy to me. Real example, somebody in our community, they publish a skill for headless outbound. So it's a markdown, because you were talking about outreach. It's a markdown file with instructions, maybe like 100 lines. You copy it, you drop it in your second brain. 10 minutes later, you have like their workflow running on your data. You didn't take a course, you didn't watch a tutorial, you downloaded their thinking directly into the system. Now, some people, they're going to read the markdown. What does this thing actually do? Other people are actually just going to push it and see what the outcome is. Other people, they're going to take it, understand what's in there and make it theirs. So it's really that sort of, it depends on who you are as a person. But it's a fundamental shift that's happening right now on how skills propagate. It used to take months for someone to figure this out, to now everybody has access to it in hours. One of our community members, even me, like I just released my GTM AI second brain. I'm basically giving people everything that I know in the form of markdown files, and they could just plug it to their data and go to town with it. That's what's being productized at the moment. And so the architecture at the moment, it's either Codex or Claude Code or Claude at the base, a memory layer, just a bunch of skills files. And then the brain holds everything it needs to know about your business in that memory file, your ICP, your offer, your pipeline, your client history, the different API integrations you want to have, MCP servers, connecting it all to your real data sources, Slack, Gmail, Drive, Notion, your CRM, blah, blah, blah. It's pretty crazy when you think about it. And so when you pull all of those data sources, you're stacking risk. And there's a concept called the lethal trifecta, originally from Simon Willison. And it was popularized in our community by Luisa Lima. And it's the idea that if a single agent has access to three things at once, private data, untrusted content like web pages or emails, and the last one is the ability to communicate externally. So private data, untrusted content like web pages or emails, and the ability to communicate externally, that's lethal for you. You have like a prompt injection waiting to happen. Someone can hide instructions in a web page today or in an email that your agents read, and suddenly it's like exfiltrating your CRM to an attacker. So it's not just a legal or ethical risk, it's also sort of a business risk.
If you've ever listened to a business podcast and thought, this sounds good, but no one actually talks like this behind closed doors, you're not wrong. On the LeaderBook AI podcast, we talk about the conversations leaders actually have after the board meeting, after the AI rollout that doesn't quite land. I'm Felicia Shakiba, and I interview CEOs, investors, and operators about what really drives performance. If you want that level of honesty, subscribe to the LeaderBook AI podcast.
And usually for that specific case, the architectural answer is isolation. So you split agents by capability. The agent that reads your inbox, that doesn't have permission to send messages, the agent that scrolls the web, doesn't touch your CRM, the agent that posts publicly doesn't read your private memory. You compartmentalize. So that's kind of the moat. But from a more, what you're struggling with your ethical demons, that's really a question of, is this the right thing to do? Yes or no? And I think that's very much a personal one.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I think some of it is still technical. So my second brain is kind of a mess. I've got
my first brain's
I've got it built in. Well, yeah, I was going to make that comment too, but I thought we'd just stick with not turning this into a psychiatry session. The second brain, I got it started. It's, I've got a whole segment of my Notion database is there, but it's basically saying all your stuff is all over the place, and you need to, I don't know, I guess I just need to, invest more time in that. Like I said before the show, like I'm trying to do 6 things at the same time. I can't build the chief of staff and do the outreach, agents and do the second brain or whatever all simultaneously. I want to keep those things in context as I sort of build my little universe of agents and sub-agents. But yeah, I need to invest time because that can help me take some things, off my plate that don't get into those moral and ethical, questions. But I love what you've laid out so much, even on the responsible AI side, because where I get concerned, especially because I spend a lot of time in the talent technology space, and every decision absolutely has to be made by a human, even if AI is in decision support role or many of those roles. But the concern has been, as you add more tools to your stack and you have more agents coming in, it's not just how that particular agent behaved, it's that agent to agent, communication and how data is passed, and, probably ties to some of those, what you were just describing, the 3 sort of lethal, pieces. And so it's just very encouraging that you've already, sort of addressed that in a very logical way. And so that's encouraging to me that we've got ways to do that and to have the right level of oversight. And
right-ish, I would say. It's you're never safe. You can be safer.
What came to mind when you were talking about those 3 lethal things was like, isn't that, that's why I haven't touched anything like OpenClaw, because I feel like that's exactly what it's doing. And all of a sudden it's going to be saying things I didn't tell it to say, buying things I didn't tell it to buy, making assumptions, losing context, and where I have somehow lost control. So I don't necessarily need to go down a full open cloud like rabbit hole, but I feel like some heavy users are obviously leaning into that. And so maybe there's just something that I've missed in terms of how to lock that down.
The discussion we're having today will seem obsolete in 3 years. Just think about what you share through your credit card information. So MasterCard data on what you're buying that then gets used and sold by ad agencies to retarget you, predict whether you're at risk of cancer, so we're already sharing so much. We're tracked continuously. We have ID cards, it's credit card information. And I think that these discussions we're having today will almost be like asking in 3 years would be like if we were having a moral and ethical discussion about whether I should use Waze on my iPhone today, knowing where that information is being stored and tracked and what some large big data companies are using that information to do. I think that's what's going to happen. And that's why my suggestion is always just to get on board so that people who do have these ethical dilemmas and don't just go brute force OpenClaw across the board are actually just as powerful as the brute force people. Because usually you get into analysis paralysis or ethical paralysis. And by the time you've made the decision to actually use the technology, people who don't ask themselves these questions, they're like miles ahead. And that's why I think people today should get serious about a few things. If I could give a few tips about what they should look into is potentially Claude Code is really cool if you're technical curious. It's not a coding tool or just Claude in general. So Claude Code if you're technical curious, Cowork if you're not. This is like your operating system, not just another chat. Just go look into it. 2 is like what's called MCP integrations, which is a fancy way of saying API integrations for your Claude Code or your Cowork. Pick your top 3 of tools you're using, like your Slack, your Notion, your Drive, your Gmail, whichever one holds your actual work. That's your minimal viable second brain. And then 3, the important one is pick one workflow you do every day, write it as a markdown file, run it once with AI, and then you save the markdown. That's a skill. You just productize part of your work. And then the framework I'd give people is the 10 levels of this. We use it inside the community. And you're trying to get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4, and we can share it in the show notes later on. But I think that's maybe good, like the first steps on how to approach this. And another thing that I think is important is to identify where are the friction points in your day and in your week. So again, trying to identify where is it that I'm spending time and effort on things that should be done by an agent anyway. I didn't sign up for this, whether it's filling out an ATS, or whether it's, filling out a spreadsheet, generating a report. I think you dropped off for a few seconds, but you just kept going on that piece, huh? And so there's also something that I'm seeing at the moment is that I think SaaS is in trouble. I posted in our community last month that I would never purchase a CRM ever again. So if I was in hiring and starting from scratch, I'd never buy an ATS ever again. Might be a bit of an exaggeration, but it got the most engagement of anything I've ever written in months because people felt it. The math on individual stacks is getting more and more interesting. Average professionals spend about $5,000 a year on SaaS subscriptions. Average professional. And we've had community members go from 12 tool stacks costing like $500 a month to $40 a month, replacing, in our world of GTM, it's like replacing Clay, Jasper, Ahrefs, Gamma, Zapier, Superhuman, Otter, Grammarly. And that's pretty crazy. And it's not just cheaper, it's a better fit, custom built for your exact workflow. So it's also like, if we keep automating ourselves into this world of agentic abundance, which companies are going to be left to actually pay for our services? So that's a little bit the question. And one important caveat is I'm not saying replace everything. It's just tools that facilitate human collaboration, like Slack, Figma for teams, real-time stuff. You tend to keep those. But because AI is bad at coordination, good at production. But the bigger frame is, I think we've entered like the era of personalized SaaS, personalized CRMs, personalized dashboards, personalized productivity tools. And I hope recruiters and recruitment, because I think that's a little bit of your audience, jumps on the bandwagon of this one as well. It's cheaper, better fit, more secure, no vendor lock-in. And the first step is really what I was talking about, to identify what's a task that's a bit mundane, a bit annoying that you do on a daily or a weekly basis, and just get curious and talk with your LLM. how can I improve this? How can I augment this? And it'll kind of show you the way how to do it in your flavor and in your style.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about CRM, because I've been poking around at certain ones that I think could work for me. But then I'm like, wait, what would I be paying for? Like, that I can't do with some of the things that I'm learning, and don't I want to just continue doing what I'm doing and learning what I'm learning and using some of these tools? I do get concerned that, by trying to save say it's, $20 a month for, one thing, am I spending that in tokens, trying to build something myself? So you've got to like really understand the total cost of ownership, just like if you were making any, build versus buy decision, right? But I think to your point, yeah, as a solopreneur, like, do I really need a CRM, like an official CRM as a monthly subscription? Because, there's only a couple key pieces of functionality that I need. And if I can recreate that in my own way, then why would I need that? But for a bigger team, for a medium to large size organization, I think you've got to think about, you may not want to replace like a system of record, something that's, secure, private, has a lot of confidential information, is orchestrating a lot of other things. So maybe you don't want to replace like your ERP system, for example, but for every more niche, tool, you've got to sort of rethink what is the best approach to get the same, functionality, the same value that I could, while also bringing the humans along to almost upskill them in the process. So now do we have more people that could build things, on our behalf? Do we have more ways and newer ways to think about as we redesign the organization itself and what we do, that immediately should have you thinking about what, could we actually use AI for this? And I think that helps you move up the sort of AI, maturity scale to say, look, we're not just doing some of the things that you alluded to earlier, David, around, sort of, just automating, routine things and getting tasks and certain activities off people's plates. But how do we really use AI to grow this organization, to find new opportunities, to overcome the challenges that have plagued the organization for a long time because you didn't have the bandwidth or, the investment available to, tackle some of those other things.
Yeah. And just on the software piece, I mean, it's happening at the moment. When it's time to renew, like that's the questions the CTOs, CFOs, CMOs are asking, like, why are we paying per seat for this tool when we can whip something up and harden it with this small team that we built and one or two devs involved? And I'm not saying everybody's vibe coding stuff into production, but more and more, the economics just don't make sense for paying multi-year contracts for enterprise solutions where you can build something that's custom fit, that works better, and that's actually easier on the adoption side for your personnel because we built it in our company style. So it's got the look, the feel, and it fits exactly their needs. So this buy versus build, for me, it's completely shifting towards build. And I think SaaS has been driving on this abstraction layer and this pricing. They got away with really high pricing and this seat-based pricing models usually that just don't make sense anymore because now it's going to be token-based. And I don't need the 200 seats, this revenue recognition or this revenue visualization tool anymore. The team can actually whip it up. And this is happening at the moment. These are discussions I'm in. Why are we paying for this? Let's stop paying for this. There's no reason to pay for this. So that premium is completely gone. And what SaaS needs to do to survive is to go MCP or CLI. And unfortunately, they're going to have to reduce their prices by like 70%. I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, that whole situation, I think, is really intriguing because I was just reading some stuff. Andreessen Horowitz was just writing about vendors like SAP and Workday and the pricing models. I mean, I've talked to smaller vendors in the talent HR space where they've already said, we're going to think about outcome-based, pricing, looking at the value that we're generating. So a little bit different than, token-based pricing, but that's certainly a factor as well. And then the other is that if you think you can just switch from humans to agents and not have them adjust their pricing model accordingly, then you might be in for a rude awakening. But if you think you can just, get rid of 5 seats and replace it with 5 agents, and they're not gonna do anything about it, you are probably mistaken.
I agree. I completely agree. I agree. And we could talk about it again and again, and it is a lot of prediction, but this is just, and the proof's in the pudding at the valuations of these businesses and this is a reckoning that was going to happen anyway. And then there's the doomsday theories about the fact that you're automating your way out of jobs and therefore salaries and therefore budgets to actually buy the things that you want to be building. But maybe it was the reckoning that we needed to move a little bit more to atoms again and move a little bit more to circular economy, pay teachers better, find people to actually be underwater welders, start building actual bridges again. Just go back to the world of atoms a little bit. Maybe it's a reckoning that we needed, but I think tech's going to take a big hit. It's massive opportunity, but I think there will be less players in the space moving forward. Could be wrong, but that's what I'm seeing on the edges, at least.
Yeah, no, I think those are great observations. I also think, to your point about people rethinking, careers, career paths. Why am I applying to jobs? I now feel confident that I could build something myself. So more people following an entrepreneurial, path, or opportunities in the gig and freelance space where they can just work on multiple projects. That side hustle becomes a real hustle, or multiple side hustles. And like yourself, juggling a very entrepreneurial mindset with managing sort of 3 entities simultaneously. I think we're going to see more of that and a lot more value coming from that. But I also think people will lean into their own capabilities, their own human potential in the process. So I think that's a little bit of a paradox with the advancement of all this technology, as the ability for people to actually realize what they're capable of.
Yeah, and if people want to follow the entrepreneurial route, just one tip is build up your audience as soon as possible. Your email list, your following, your audience, because go-to-market distribution is the name of the game now. So if you build something fantastic but have nobody to sell it to, that's an issue.
Yeah. David, thank you so much for all your time. I mean, such great insight.
Thank you.
Really impressed with all the things that you're doing. We definitely have more to talk about. I'm confident. Got some additional advice from me personally. So thank you again for spending so much time with me and my audience. I know there's a lot of great insight for people to take from this. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.